Obrigada, Fernando. Thank you so much. Thanks to everyone for joining. Okay, so let's jump right into the Kellogg application. One of the first things that jumps out at us is that you can actually apply for multiple different types of MBAs at Kellogg. So there is a 2-year MBA. There is also a 1-year MBA. So you can, if you go to this link here, I'm not going to click on it here now because it takes me out and then I have to log back in again. But if you are on the older side of things, by which I mean, let's say 8, 9, maybe 10 years post college, and you are interested in the Kellogg MBA, you might fare better in the application process if you apply for the 1-year MBA program. You will have to take some coursework prior to enrolling, but that can often be one of the better ways for the more experienced candidates to get into Kellogg. You still graduate with a Kellogg MBA, you're just doing some of that coursework. You either already did it in college or you did it at some point over the past few years, or you say that you will do it in advance. So I did just want to emphasize that that is something that Kellogg offers that not a lot of other top MBA programs offer. So I did want to make you aware of that. So for the areas of academic interests, one thing that is always frustrating for me about Kellogg is that they've got like these the areas of interest, but they've also got these pathways, which are sort of sequences of different courses drawn from different disciplines. Whatever you choose here, just make sure that it meshes with what you're going to write about in your career vision later, right? It's not going to make sense to select, say, real estate here if then later on you don't mention wanting to go into real estate. um, I would pick maybe 2 of these at least because they are very proud of their flexible curriculum. And so you can demonstrate that you would take advantage of that flexible curriculum if you select at least 2 of these different areas, or the pathways themselves. Actually, one pathway is good enough because the pathways do tend to draw from different disciplines. Um, okay, are you applying to another school for a dual degree program? Like, that's very few people. One thing that's interesting here is that they ask if you're a reapplicant. That by itself is not necessarily all that new or all that different. But you do select like, okay, which type of application did you submit last time? And which year did you submit it? I would assume that somewhere on their back end that allows them to pull up the old application, should they want to. Moving on to personal background. The personal background page for any school is usually pretty straightforward. It's going to be your name, your mailing address. Sometimes people have more than one address. For example, if they are based overseas temporarily for a certain assignment. Um, this is kind of nice. Your current email address. If you need to change it, you can migrate the account. That's a nice little minor feature that sometimes people, just as a heads up, in case you have not yet created your application uh, things yet, use a personal email address as opposed to an employer. Just if for whatever reason, heaven forbid, you are unable, like let's say your company goes out of business or something. I hope it doesn't. But in case you do not have access to that employer email later on, make sure that just for the sake of convenience that you pick an email address here that is something that you can access no matter what. Of course, make sure that it is a professional sounding thing at gmail.com and not like, DJ Jazzy Dance Move 69 at gmail.com, right? You're going to want to make sure that it's a professional sounding thing, but something that you can access. This is also interesting. They allow you to put in your LinkedIn profile. Now, you guys might not realize this, but a year or two ago, I actually did a session on social media and the admissions process. Um, I think at least half of admissions officers in a poll that was done a couple of years ago, so it's probably higher now, right? At least half of admissions officers, I think, admitted that they do Google a person and just what's up with that? Like what sorts of pictures do they have? What's their LinkedIn profile say? So just a heads up, that you do want to make sure that your LinkedIn profile, at the very minimum, does not contradict anything in your application. So you're going to want to make sure that the titles match. Um, and it behooves you just in general to have some more information in your LinkedIn profile than just your title and the dates. In the LinkedIn profile, you can put perhaps in a more conversational tone what your responsibilities have been and what your accomplishments have been. Biographical and citizenship information, pretty straightforward. Share more about yourself. Where did you grow up? This is kind of annoying because it doesn't really, for people who grew up in more than one place, it doesn't really give you a bunch of space to put what those other places might have been, but it's also not super important, right? Admissions committees are mostly interested in who you have been from college until now. So while where you grew up or how you grew up can certainly be of interest, it's not such an important thing. I mean, here Kellogg is clearly signaling to us that they're not like super. It doesn't really matter a ton to them. So this next section is to try to give them a sense of, they're less interested in where you grew up and more interested in the adults around you in the household in which you were raised. What level of education did they have? Let me zoom in a little on this guy. What's the highest level of education that your parents had? Uh, just in general, what's their occupation? And sometimes they ask for like, where does your parent work? What do they do? Here they just want general buckets, right? Are they a manual laborer? Are they a skilled? Are they skilled worker? Are they retired, etc. Um, and then here, if you did have an sort of the quote unquote uncommon childhood situation raised by a single parent, family member, foster care, whatever that might be, then you would enter that here. There's no real space to elaborate on that, but I think they're just trying to get a general sense of what was the overall environment where you were growing up. Language spoken in your childhood home. Um, obviously you would just pick whatever, or you would list maybe two. Maybe you had two languages spoken in your childhood home, like I did. I had Spanish and English spoken in my home from each of my parents. Um, and then this next part I like. Have you ever been responsible for providing significant and continuing financial support for someone else? For example, a spouse, or a sibling, etc. This can be good because sometimes many of us in the applicant pool, if you're the first in your family to say graduate from college and you've got siblings at home, perhaps you're sending some of your paycheck home to help that sibling with their schooling expenses. That's a very common scenario. Or maybe you're helping your parents pay for their living expenses. This helps give sort of a richer view of who you are within your family. Gender identity and sexual orientation for this, just pick whatever you identify as. Sometimes people, well, not very often, thankfully, but every once in a while, someone's like, how do I game this answer? Like, how do I use this answer to my advantage? The answer is you don't use it to your advantage. You simply answer it truthfully, or at least as comfortable as you are publicly identifying some of this. For example, your sexual orientation. If you prefer not to answer, then you could just prefer not to answer. um, Personal pronouns, and then if you have a spouse, partner, or significant other. So pretty straightforward. Moving on to employment history. This is where some of the different schools have quite a bit of a difference in terms of what they allow, how big is the text box, et cetera, et cetera. So for the organization name, sometimes it's like it does search. See, so if I say Amazon, oh my gosh, they have like 14 different options here for Amazon. So pick the one that is closest to you, and if it's not there, just enter in whatever it might be. Um, so for the position and your title, what I would advise that you put here is that you don't just simply put what it would be on the resume. You don't simply say financial analyst, but here I would say something like financial analyst, comma, the logistics and supply chain division, or something like that, to give me a little bit more context about where is it that you're working. If it's a big, big, big organization, this can be a great place to let me know where within, say, Google do you work, right? There's like 40 different divisions, maybe fewer than 40, but there's a bunch of divisions at a place like Google. So are you in AdWords? Are you in Google Maps? Are you in Gmail? You can add a little bit more information here. I can't remember. Hold on. I think I did this was about a 64 character word limit here. So 64 characters, that does allow you to put a few extra words of explanation. Your starting compensation and your ending compensation, put those in US dollars as your base salary. Um, and then your performance bonus if applicable. So just be sure that you're doing those conversions in advance. Just as I should have said this at the beginning, I believe that the applications are due at 5 p.m. Central US time, which is the time zone that Chicago is based in. But so first of all, if you are planning on submitting the day of the application, just keep the times in mind, because some schools will have noon or 5 p.m. or midnight. So Kellogg, it is 5 p.m. local time. But I advise always trying to submit at least the day before, if not sooner, because first of all, it forces you to try to fill in all these little boxes in advance. If you wait for the day of, especially if you wait for the day of to start filling in these boxes, there might be a ton of information where maybe you have to pull up an old pay stub or an old bank account record from 4 years ago. Like, what was my compensation then? And oh, if I have to convert it now into US dollars. So, just a heads up to get started early. So, what industry were you in? What job function were you in? The number of direct reports, please be conservative here. So if you say, well, Maria, technically in the org chart, technically I don't have any direct reports, but I mentor 4 younger people, or I'm kind of the unofficial team leader of 2 other younger people. That is not, I would rather that that you put 0 here, and then elsewhere you can say something like, for example, let's say in description of duties, you could say, I oversee, I lead a team of, certain number of people, informally, because a direct report has a very formal connotation, right? That means that those people, like, you are literally responsible for their performance reviews and whether or not they get a raise and all that kind of stuff. So sometimes people feel tempted to sort of overstate it, but then if I call your supervisor, if I contact your supervisor and I'm like, "Hey, does Maria have any direct reports?" And they're like, "Not really. I mean, she's just a business development manager, like not really at the super," then that's embarrassing, right? At best it's embarrassing, and at worst it could be seen as you lying. And that's then you get rejected. So, just a heads up. If you're not sure, lower the number. Go with a more conservative answer. So the description of duties here, this was pretty short. This was it was 240 characters, which is such a random number of characters, right? Some of the other, like HBS, which was another session I did this morning, they've got 250 characters. How they came up with 240 characters, I'm not sure. But as you can see, here is sort of a sample of what that many characters roughly looks like. I originally had as a joke that I worked for the PT Barnum Circus. So what I would say here is, for the description of your duties, first of all, do not simply copy and paste from your resume, because first of all, it just kind of makes you look lazy, but also it's a wasted opportunity, right? They are going to have the resume. They might actually be reading the resume first before they get to this page, even if in the application itself the resume comes later. At least sometimes when I'm reading applications, I skip to the resume first to tell me, okay, is this someone I should take seriously, or is this a candidate? Is this someone who's really not that competitive of a candidate? In which case, I can sort of shut my brain down just a little when it comes to reading the rest of this. So very frequently, the resume is the first thing read. So first of all, don't copy it from the resume because I'm already going to have the resume. Second of all, it looks lazy if you copy and paste. And third of all, most importantly, that's a wasted opportunity. What I would advise for you to put here for the description of your duties, a lot of the description of your duties should already be in your resume itself. And at least what in Applicant Lab I teach is, I call it the background blurb. So you don't have to put so many details here. What I would focus on here, especially because the new essay set for Kellogg this year does not allow for quite as much leadership, demonstration of leadership, as in the past. What I would focus on here is really trying to at least describe one or even two of your greatest leadership hits. But of course, again, not in the resume language, more like giving me some details, you know, I convinced the vice president to help me do this. I overcame objections to launch the most successful marketing campaign we've ever had. Whatever that might be, try to write that here in plain English, not in resume speak, because it's going to give them. This is really one of the only places in this application where you can convey a little bit more information around the leadership wins that are on your resume. So just sort of keep that in mind. Um, for reason for leaving, if it is your current job, I know that sometimes it's tempting here to be like, my reason for leaving will be to join the Kellogg class of 20 whatever next summer. Woohoo! Go purple people. Like, no, this is not the place to be cute. It's perfectly fine to just put NA for not applicable here. Um, Now, if this is for a previous job that you left, what you can do here, what I advise for reason for leaving, is highlight the better aspects of the next job. So if that next job, for example, was the first time you were going to be given a team that was reporting to you, or if the next job was going to be your first time that you were going to get to work overseas, you can emphasize that point here by saying reason for leaving. I wanted, having already learned everything I could about the lion taming industry, I wanted a more international assignment, which is why working for the such and such circus in another part of the world was the better choice, was a great learning opportunity for me. So you can totally put that here. If however your reason for leaving was perhaps a negative one, um see if you can put sort of a silver lining on it. So, reason for leaving, unfortunately, there was a major staff reduction, and I, as one of the younger or newer members, was affected. Um, but it was, it gave me the chance to really evaluate what I wanted in terms of next steps, or it helped me really be thoughtful about where I wanted to go next. So, this is also an opportunity to add in a few more details around your narrative without, necessarily having to waste precious essay space on it. So your years of full-time work experience when you matriculate, by this is post college up until now. Do you currently have an active role in a family business? Okay, if so, 100 characters, that's only about 20 words. That's not very much. So if you do in fact have an active role in a family business, I advise that you put that family business on your resume. If it's not your full-time job, I would put it at the bottom underneath like the additional section, just because otherwise if you put it as if you put it up at the top as experience, that tends to imply that it was a full-time position, and then if you've got two full-time positions, look at it, just it's confusing. So I tend to advocate, if you're this is kind of common for people with family businesses, like, oh, for 10 hours a week I help my mom with the bookkeeping or whatever it might be, I would put that underneath under additional section. Please upload your resume. They do not state anything about what kind of resume guidelines. They got nothing like that. Usually, the advice is to keep your resume to one page maximum for the MBA application. Um, okay, if you are a non native English speaker, then have you worked in the United States or an English speaking country for 2 consecutive years within the last 5 years? That is an oddly specific question, but I would just whatever. It's pretty straightforward, right? It is what it is. Either you have or you haven't. And hopefully your TOEFL or IELTS, I never know how to say that. Maybe that will help you. So it doesn't even matter, because if your score there is strong enough, then who cares? Okay, will you be receiving financial support? So if you're frequently when management consultants are applying, you don't know yet if your firm is sponsoring you, so this might be pending. Um, yes or no. Okay, so here's where we get to one of the first trickier parts of this, beyond merely like the employment description. Okay, desired industry after Kellogg, whatever it is, right? We just sort of pick some things. Okay. Um, Sometimes these drop downs are a little bit, they're simultaneously incredibly comprehensive, and yet they don't seem to cover everything. But okay, fine. They need a drop down. So share with us the motivations behind your desired industry function after graduating from Kellogg. So this is where you would put the origin story, or what I in Applicant Lab call your hook. This is where you start to explain a little bit, how did you even get interested in this? So if you say, well, I want to work immediately after Kellogg, I want to work in management consulting. This is where you would say, here's how I first got interested in it, or here are the people. This is not only how I first got interested in it, but also I want you to talk about the homework that you've done about what it takes to get that job. So if it is something like management consulting and you're not currently a management consultant, have you spoken to people about what that process is like? Right? This is where you can say something like, because oddly get 500 characters, or is it more than 500 characters? Oh yeah, it's five. Okay, it's 500 characters, and like that's a lot of characters for you. That's almost 100 words roughly, right? If we assume about 5 characters per word on average. Um, so this is where I would definitely put that research that you've done. So if you are applying with a career switching story, this is where you can say, like, I spoke to 3 other people who used to do Teach for America, and they all got MBAs, and they all said that if I want to go into investment banking, I can, but that I should first take the following modeling, financial modeling classes, and I did that, and boom, I'm ready to go. Um, so if you are a career switcher, just realize that the onus is on you to prove that you, at a minimum, have researched what it takes to get this job. Um, and then you could also here put a plan B, because many times sometimes happily people do get that first choice job out of business school, hooray! But sometimes they don't. So if you are applying with, say, a consulting or banking story, especially because sometimes, or even a tech story, now that those jobs are getting harder to get, you might want to put a plan B that still gets you to the same place in the long term. And then this next question, I really rolled my eyes pretty heavily at this next question. Sorry, Kellogg, I love you guys. You are wonderful and warm and fuzzy, but what does a successful career look like 5 years after you graduate from Kellogg? Um, the stuff above, but better? So anyway, this is annoying. I think basically what you would say here, I'm being a little sarcastic, but basically 5 years after you graduate from Kellogg would probably be you'd be in your second job after business school. So at that point, if you're thinking that you might leave that first post MBA job, especially if it is something like consulting, because not a lot of people stay in consulting beyond those sort of 2 years after graduating from business school, then you could say like, oh, I would then use, you know, how you'd use post MBA job to jump to next thing. Right. So I'd use what I learned in management consulting to then, hopefully in 5 years after graduation, I would then be working for a manufacturing company. I would then be working for a tech company or whatever. So it's a 5 years is kind of a weird, it's not quite long term, it's so just sort of think ahead to what that job would look like. Again, make sure it's something logical and reasonable, not I will be simultaneously the CEO of 100 out of the Fortune 500 companies. Like that's not going to happen. Um, so yeah, just sort of I really dislike this box. I will bet you $10 that they're going to change this box next year because they're going to get all kinds of weird answers to this one. But who knows? I just think this is good. Like, what does a successful career look like? Like, oh, one where I'm still getting paid, I guess. Like, I don't know, whatever. We can chuckle about this question between us, but the pragmatic reality is just talk about what that evolution might look like, how it builds upon the post MBA job, et cetera, et cetera. Have you ever served in any military or armed forces? That's pretty clear. Um, so for the awards, you can list up to 4, and these are for during, and they specifically say during and post college. So this is not the place to talk about that 8th grade spelling bee that you won. That's awesome that it matters a lot to you, but uh, a graduate business degree program is not going to care. This description is crazy short. Let me go into my little spreadsheet that I've got open. It's 100 characters. Um, Yikes. That's pretty short. What I would do here is if it's major enough for you to want to put it in here as one of your top 4 awards or things or certifications, it's probably major enough to merit going onto the resume. And so divide up, think strategically, take a few minutes to think about, okay, what am I going to put on the resume versus what are the 100 characters that I'm going to put here. Moving on to education. I don't think that there's anything here that's really noteworthy. It's all pretty standard. Um, where you went to school, what you studied. Did you have multiple majors? So did you have a first major, second major? I did not actually study osteopathic medicine. I just thought that was a funny option. Um, this is kind of they've kind of opened themselves up to this bit of a mess where it's like, if you have a GPA, it's a 4 point whatever on a scale of what? And it's like 1, 3, 4, 4.3. They should just have this be an open text box, right? Because what if it's 7.7? Oh no, what do I do now? Um, oh wait, can I do it here? Oh, it didn't let me do this before. Okay. Well, anyway, I was like, what a weird drop down. But I guess that's what I get for not actually trying to break. I did not try to break the application form as I prepared for this session. So, um, anyway, I guess you can put your own scale. I was going to say, such a weird thing that they're forcing themselves into. Okay. So anyway, did you have any sort of honors? What was your ranking class? Um, so by the way, if you're worried about like your GPA, like, oh, I have a 7.2 from my university in India, and are they going to think that that's a very low GPA? They won't, because first of all, if you are from especially a well-known university from your home country, chances are someone in the past has enrolled in the school from that university. So you're not going to be the first person they're seeing with a transcript from that place. And then second of all, this is where the honors really come in, right? The honors and the class rank really help you elaborate on the fact, like, look, this number might look like a low number, but in fact, I was pretty strong. Submit your transcript. That's pretty standard stuff. Let me. Oh, how do I cancel out of here? Boink. All right. Um, so professional certification. So here's where you would put whatever. If you have a CFA, or if you're a chartered accountant, or you have your series, your series 7, or whatever it might be. It's okay. Moving on to test scores. Da, 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 da. So you, as with all schools, you're going to enter in the test date, your numbers, the raw numbers, and then the percentile numbers. Um, if you because you need to upload at least sort of the unofficial score report or whatever it's called usually, just match the percentile number to whatever is in that score report. So don't go if you took the test 2 years ago and then you go back and you look now and you're like, oh, but Maria, a Q50 is now a certain percentile. Like, just put whatever's in the score report. That's just going to be um the easiest thing to do. So, moving on to the essays. I am sad about Kellogg's new essay 1, uh, because essay 1 is now basically this is a lot of words to say. It's basically a statement of purpose essay. It's basically, what are your goals? What are your career goals? And why do you need the Kellogg MBA to achieve those goals? It's a little bit frustrating for me because those 2 boxes that we talked about before, where I was complaining about like the successful career 5 years post graduation and what's your motivation for your post MBA goal. They actually also talk here, what are your motivations for pursuing the MBA? So it's a little bit of thematic overlap. But so what I would say is, write that little smaller text box those smaller text boxes first, and then whatever explanation about your intended career path does not fit in those little text boxes, then you can put that into essay 1. Um, but it's a little bit weird that there's like, oh, there's this kind of text box off to the side. The reason I'm a little bit sad about this essay is that for years Kellogg did not have a why Kellogg essay, and what they would do is that when you get to the 3 video questions, I don't know, oh, they don't mention them here in the application. Um, but at some point after you hit submit, you're going to get a thing back that is like, okay, here, these 3 video questions. And for years, that first video question was always, why do you want to come to Kellogg? So that gave you a little bit of you didn't have to do the research for the essay, um, but now you do, uh, which is, it's just fine. I think what's happening is that, so I was at the AGAC conference a few months ago. AGAC is an acronym for this sort of elite admissions consultants organization. And a lot of the schools there were saying that in the past, people might apply to say 4 business schools, or maybe 6, and now they're seeing people are applying to 8 or 10. And so I think what we're seeing is Kellogg, and also I noticed UCLA did this as well, I believe. They took out what used to be sort of more of a leadership essay and changed it with a why do you want to come to our school essay. Because I think what's happening is that maybe yield percentages are going down. So people are saying, I want to come to your school, and then they get in and they're like, yoink, I'm actually going someplace else. Um, and so I think I'm seeing this trend this year is that schools are like, okay, fine, but you actually have to like want to like, you at least have to pretend to want to come here. And so that's why they're asking these like why our school essays. It's just a shame because I thought Kellogg has had some really interesting questions in the past. Um, they thankfully still do have a very interesting essay too. Describe a specific professional experience where you had to make a difficult decision, and then which values guided your decision making process. So a difficult decision, hopefully was within the context of a really good leadership story, right? Like, so think about when were you at your leadershipy best, and then walk me through how did you make that decision and what were and then the values that guided the decision making process and how it impacted your that stuff's sort of at a throwaway at the end. Um, I would focus the majority of this word count on the actual leadership thing you did and the difficult decision therein. Um, and to be clear, for Kellogg especially, because they are so teamwork focused, make this an example that involved a team and other people. If the difficult decision was, I wasn't sure which cloud vendor we should use, should we go with Amazon Web Services or should we go with the Microsoft Azure? That's not the kind of difficult decision that's going to, if it's, I mean, that's all you got, then go for it. But hopefully you have something that involves other people that shows you making a difficult decision like, should we fire this person on my team or something like that, to show that you've got the people skills that Kellogg is looking for. Typical reapplicant essay here. And then the additional information essay, um, 280 words. This is the standard optional essay. They're just not calling it an optional essay, but for those of you who are brand new to the MBA admissions scene, the optional essay is where you explain something like, "I had a really bad semester in college, and here's what happened," or whatever it might be. Any sort of red flags you think your candidacy might have, don't think that they won't notice. They will notice whatever it is, whether it was a bad semester or a period of unemployment or whatever it might be. So please, it's better to address it than to hope and pray that they will not notice it, because they will notice. All right. How do you spend your time? The organizational activities. Um, my tips here are that for the organization name, if it's something very large and well known, like say the Red Cross, what I would put here in parentheses is a little bit, you could put a little bit more context, right? So like the Los Angeles chapter, I don't know, blood drive division. So you could give a little bit more context as opposed to just the organization name. You can help me understand, where are you doing it? Are you on a nationwide thing? Is it a local thing, et cetera, et cetera. Role also has open text box. I think it does ultimately limit. Yeah, it does limit it a little bit. Let's see what those are. Doo-doo-doo. Up. Oh, weird. It gave me 243 characters. I've got my Excel open elsewhere. Um, okay, and the description of participation, that's interesting that the role has more of a text box than the 100 character limit. So what I'd advise here is that description of participation, I would focus this 100 characters on describing your most impactful impact. What? Whatever project you did with this organization that was like the one you're proudest of, I would use this 100 characters to describe that. And then up here in the role, what you could do is you could say, for example, various, you know, I was just a member from this year to this year, but then I was the VP of whatever from this year to this year, right? So you could tell more of that narrative of your, if especially if it's a long-standing involvement, you can tell that narrative here. If it's not a long-standing involvement, then maybe, or if it was like, oh, actually, Maria, I just showed up once to a blood drive and I gave out some cookies and lemonade, then it's probably not worthy. It's probably not a worthy addition to your application. You can put up to 6 activities. This could also be, by the way, a hobby that you have. I think, let me see, actually, post college. Yeah. So even if it's not if you're like, oh, Maria, I work in banking and I just don't have time to do a lot of community service, maybe you could put, but you do have a commitment to a significant commitment to a hobby. You could probably put that here if you're desperate for something. But also, like I said, if you just went once to one volunteer event, don't don't put it, because it actually hurts you. It's like, okay, so they clearly realize that volunteering is important because they did it that one time, but yet they didn't do it enough. Like, wait, what? So just, you look better if you just leave it blank, in my opinion. Up to 6 international experiences, including if you were living abroad. So here's where you would describe this. Let me see what. Whoa, I don't think it gave me a limit for this, guys. Oh well. Just because it's an open text box doesn't mean we're going to spend 14 pages here, but I always like to see what the limits are when it doesn't tell you. Um, yes. Please do not include personal vacation or travel. I was about to say that part out loud because I hadn't seen if it had said that or not. This does not, vacation or travel does not count. They want it to be more significant. A part-time job or work study during college. Well, this is interesting. The average number of hours a week spent. So this can be especially useful if you did have a semester or a year in college where your grades were not terrific, but you were working 15, 20 hours a week to support your studies, definitely put that here. And then a brief description of employment. Yeah, I think it depends. If you had multiple jobs on campus, maybe you even put something like working in the dish room or whatever. That's what I worked in the dish room. Uh, so yeah, I think the 200 in case those 200 characters aren't enough. This looks like it's an open text box and not looking for a number, so you could put a little bit more description there. Are you doing one of these MBA prep organizations? Obviously, you select yes if you are. Recommendations are pretty standard. The only thing to note that might be a question mark for some of you if you're new to this is you do want to waive. You will be asked this whole thing about like the Buckley Amendment and the family whatever. You do want to waive your access to the report. Basically, what this means is that especially if you don't get accepted, or even if you do get accepted, if you do get accepted and you want to see what your recommender said about you, technically, legally, you're allowed to ask them to show you if you do not waive your rights. But if you waive your rights, you will not be able to see it. So why should I do that, Maria? Because if I'm your recommender and I know that you will never see what I wrote about you, I am far more likely to be candid in what I say. So if it asks about like what's a time you gave the applicant negative feedback and what was their response, if the person did not waive their rights to it and I'm an admissions reader, I'll have it's not deadly, but it'll just be a little thing in the back of my head saying, like, is this recommender really telling the full truth, or are they sort of watching what they say because they're nervous about this person eventually seeing it. There's a whole section here if you know people, or if you went to Kellogg, or if Northwestern, whatever. That's very few people. It's a little bit odd that they have a whole section for it. And then the honor code. And then that is pretty much it.
That sounds great. Thank you so much once again, Maria.
All right. Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. Thank you, everyone. See you all.
Bye.
Bye.